Shadow the Hedgehog is a character for the ages, a breakthrough lab experiment that provided answers to some of the greatest mysteries this world has ever seen at the time. Except for one: the tremendous inadequacy to save one of the most important people in his life and inadvertently leading to the execution of another. This is a man that has braved it all, yet is unsuccessful in understanding that the source of his frustration lies within. The name's Jiggy. I'm glad to have you, whether you're new or you've been around a while. Shadow the Hedgehog is a failure, and it's time to delve into what makes the most lore-rich character in Sonic wear that title proudly. Day 9. No one aboard the Space Colony Ark could have quite understood what exactly we were getting ourselves into with Professor Gerald's newest invention. Undoubtedly, the end result will be this extravagant cause for celebration, especially considering it's to help Miss Maria. But why did he make it sentient? The prototype quadrupedal appropriately named Biolizard was one thing. I mean, we'd used animals beforehand to aid in understanding diseases, but how come the professor decided to create something that could walk, and talk, and kind of think for itself? It just does whatever the professor and ourselves tell it to do, but there's a stark difference in how it interacts with us and Miss Maria. No, she gave him a name, I have to stop that. Shadow. Fitting. In an attempt to begin the discovering process for Maria's cure to her illness, Gerald developed the ultimate lifeform, Shadow the Hedgehog. To say that the young Robotnik changed Shadow's life and gave him meaning is nothing new to a lot of folks, but the original purpose of the Hedgehog is to be a means to an end. This was not the first time Gerald had created life. I mean, he does have two sons after all, but there was something different about this son. What, or rather who, originally started out as a live test subject to take on the brunt of work needed in order to uncover a solution to the dilemma disturbing his creator's granddaughter, Shadow would find himself partaking in more than just scientific discoveries. A subject with one purpose set in stone from birth that soon found himself in the midst of a personal breakthrough. Unbeknownst to him at the time, this socially awkward test tube baby was undergoing a metamorphosis allowing for love to be developed. A love of all things that a certain someone adored as well. Every day he spent with Maria, Shadow found himself becoming ever so slightly aligned with her ideals of the world, and although he may not have completely comprehended all of them, he knew that these thoughts and possibilities are what made her the one that he admired so much. As witty as she was lively, Maria Robotnik imbued Shadow with an understanding that no amount of science and research could even fathom to do. Now, for anyone that may be uninitiated, this Hedgehog's ability to grasp and do all that he does is by design. In Sonic Battle, it is discovered that Gerald used Maria as the basis for both Shadow and his experiments on the Gizoid, Emerald, in an attempt to make these entities a bit more than the machines they initially started out as. The professor saw his granddaughter as one of the purest forms of love that the human race could exude. She was this beacon of hope for all those that came across her and could fill a room full of brightness just with presence alone. Given Maria's reputation aboard the Ark and even back on Earth amongst family, one would be misguided to assume this wasn't the best course of action for a researcher to take that had already put more smiles on faces than he can count as a product of his own works. Not only was Shadow's creation itself a milestone for the scientific world, but given that this was a synthetic life form that could properly adapt to the environment it found itself in, was a testament to humans' ability to play God. Luckily, Gerald was this god that saw humanity as an unwavering good that possessed a bright future and many reasons to be a servant for. Until he didn't. The same ideals, philosophies, and promise that Shadow the Hedgehog was maybe, just maybe, beginning to register thanks to his elder sister, would be taken away by the same man who now saw those as unnecessary, for being capable of making a world that dared to encroach on the sanctity of his goals, beg for mercy. After all, just as easily as God gave Adam and Eve everything they could have wanted and took it away at a moment's notice, why couldn't Gerald? Day 41. Seeing Shadow be around everyone even when it's not time for the test is interesting. The amount of people he interacts with has grown, but it's still few and far between. I don't think he would have gotten this far without Miss Maria though. Much like the rest of us, Shadow's spirits always get a boost whenever she's around, and I get the feeling that maybe I should properly introduce myself. No, that's weird. He already knows who I am, doesn't he? I I am one of the main six assisting the professor with stress tests, but maybe that's why he hasn't spoken to me outside of that setting. That doesn't make sense though. I usually see him speaking with in the break room, albeit Miss Maria is there too. Oh well, maybe I'll try my hand at sparking something up soon. What makes Shadow as a character so alluring to a lot of people is the fact that he's a man of few words, but when he has something to say, he'll make sure that you hear it. Being the type of character whose words hold weight means something, especially when you find yourself in a world of others similar to you that appear to have larger than life personalities and ideas. This guy is the walking definition of "I told you so," and while many acknowledge that there's credence to the stances that Shadow takes, they often will still go and do their own things regardless. Ironic, since it's typically what the Dark Knight himself does. Him being autonomous was what Gerald and everyone working on the creation of the Hedgehog aimed for, of course, but I like to put up the notion that perhaps they went too far with the freedoms implemented. For as calculated and precise Shadow can be when it comes to certain things, he often leans perhaps too harshly in favor of one side or the other. To him, sometimes there is only one right way and everything else is irrelevant. Something worth conceding that we've all been in similar shoes before. In part, thanks to his forever promise with Maria to always ensure the planet knows peace, Shadow will often take what he believes is the path of least resistance no matter what anyone else says. I've echoed this sentiment already in another video, but it's important to hammer this home now because it'll tie back to the whole point of this later. Going back to the somber vigilante proper, however, his stubbornness and tenacity has gotten him in trouble more times than he'd probably care to count, especially when it comes to tension with comrades. On multiple occasions and throughout his 24 years of existing in this franchise, our favorite mercenary has combated even his closest allies on conflicting topics. Eventually, Shadow will concede either if the opposing side can offer him enough proof that their stance is the right way to go about things, or after sitting with it for a bit. It's why he helps Sonic in an attempt to stop an avalanche in IDW, why he goes out of his way to assist the crew with battling Eggman whenever he's up to something, and even the reason as to why, at least in another life I suppose, he was working with Gun, which really shouldn't have been retconned, but whatever. The Hedgehog becoming a consistent staple and involved member of the world was perhaps the best thing to happen to him. From Sonic Adventure 2 to Sonic 06, these were the Shadow years. We got peeks into what made him tick, the types of relationships he built up since regaining his memories, and how he navigates his place in the world. He went from this robotic shell that was used as a puppet for revenge to a character allowed to forge his own path. Shadow the Hedgehog went on an emotional roller coaster, one of self-discovery and acceptance, forgiveness and regret, and coincidentally, a long-lasting battle to become the very thing he once denounced: human. Day 89. The ancient battle unit we found had a mishap last week, but we were able to stop it before the damage got too bad thanks to our resident Hedgehog. Guess those self-defense classes the professor makes Shadow take came in handy. He's a quick learner overall though, so I'll give him that one. From one day to another, it almost seems like he's mastered his ability to stop time locally. Don't get me wrong, the little guy is fast on his own, but with this, it's like he moves in the blink of an eye. Professor Gerald mentioned the name to us a couple of times, but he doesn't really like to talk about it all that much for some reason. Something control? I mean, if I were him, I'd be bragging about how I managed to harness what is essentially time manipulation and put it into a real living being. Wait, how did he do that? The old guy's a natural born genius, so I'm sure it's too complicated for me to understand. I'm still lacking on my goal of having a full-blown conversation with him, but I told this super corny joke in the break room the other day in between tests, and guess who gave me a little smirk? I heard he likes coffee, and I'm partial to it myself, so maybe I should bring him some before the test today. Huh. That's weird. I don't remember any scheduled gun walkthroughs today. Shadow the Hedgehog may be the ultimate life form, but is a failure as the perfect being. And it shouldn't be any other way. A perfect state ceases to exist in the world, and it is what makes the concept all the more interesting. Living your entire life with the expectations from others that you are incapable of making mistakes is the most monumental handicap in the world. The perfect Shadow that Maria envisioned is one that she believed would stay true to himself no matter what, and eventually find a like-minded group of individuals that would accept every flaw that he came with. much like how everyone accepted her flaws. And the perfect shadow that a distraught Gerald envisioned was one that would forego those emotions to rightfully avenge the death of their cherished Maria, even if it meant the destruction of everything that she worked to achieve with Shadow. Our dark hero failed to deliver on the latter because at the end of the rope he still had one lingering emotion that Gerald didn't: his humanity. Shadow doesn't need to be a hero of justice like Sonic, an egotistical villain like Eggman, or caught in a perpetual state of limbo like Metal Sonic. The thing that should make this Hedgehog so enticing is that he's allowed to be morally gray when it comes to solving problems, just as much as he should be hard-headed to the point where it's necessary to have friends talk some sense into him. If someone like Sonic is supposed to be the beacon that resembles the 1% of people that know what they want out of life, then Shadow represents the other 99% that are just trying their best. While there are certain traits of the Hedgehog that do get lost in translation in various media, I can confidently say Shadow has never been written to have all the answers. His entire story arc from SA2 to Sonic 06 is a long series of finding, redefining, and accepting that humanity will do what it wants to at the end of the day, and that he should embrace the qualities that make him human all the same, even if he ends up being their enemy. Now, does that make it the perfect choice every time? Not at all. However, it grants him the one thing he struggled with since the inception of his birth: a sense of self. Now, all of that is nice, but it doesn't exempt the Hedgehog from making decisions that lean too far into those human qualities that lead to lapses in judgment. Like I said, he doesn't have all the answers and admittedly has a bit of a temper on him as well. So when you combine those two, sometimes things turn out worse for wear.